Sam Seder of the Majority Report did appear on MSNBC earlier today to discuss the Spotify Joe Rogan controversy and actually called for his censorship. And we'll get into that clip in a second. Before we do, though, I did want to remind everyone what happened to Sam Seder himself not all that long ago. Oh, wow. What was that? MSNBC gives in to disingenuous right-wing smear, fires Sam Seder. They fired him over old tweets. This happened in 2017. He was eventually reinstated and, of course, has his Peacock show now. But it's still pretty ironic and I think worth pointing out that Sam Seder's on a network advocating for censorship, the same network that effectively censored him, too. Pretty funny stuff, if you ask me. But let's give.
It's like when Nathan Robinson tries to chastise other fucking places for being anti-worker when his staff tried to turn into a co-op and then he tried to fire all of them. Whoops. Or speaking of Nathan Robinson, when he tried to say that cancel culture didn't exist and then he got fired from the fucking Guardian because he wanted to write articles that they deemed pro-Palestinian and called anti-Semitic. So yeah. Anyway, a lot of that going around on left discourse, I have to say.
I just think it's genuinely insane going on a network that literally censored you to advocate for the censorship of another person, especially when that person, as one of our commenters in the chat pointed out, defended him at that point in time and called that ridiculous and, said it was ridiculous to fire someone for some old tweets that were obviously jokes. But again, with all that said, let's give Sam a chance to explain himself. Let's hear him out, at least in this 1-minute clip that was posted on Twitter by Sally Hunt. So let's take a look here. And yeah, as it says here, MSNBC guest, not contributor, but guest. So yeah, let's check this out, guys.
You're talking to 11 million people every time you do a podcast. You have a responsibility. And if you're the company that's paying for it, it's on you. And he gets a Spotify paycheck. And so it's on them. It's part of their brand now that they are the ones who are publishing this stuff. They are profiting off it, and it is hurting people. And it's their responsibility and it's their brand.
And the other thing about it too is like you can just talk about stuff that doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? Like that's the other thing. You could just choose to like talk about comedy or talk about like
he's in over his head.
Right.
On some
that's
level.
the thing.
And that's the bottom line. He's in over his head. He doesn't realize it. He's making too much money for them to tell him. And that's the bottom line. I mean, today he tweeted out, sort of gloriously, this AP story about ivermectin and a study from Japan. Well, 20 minutes later, the AP corrected its headline and you never heard from him again about it. And so, this is a problem. You're talking to 11 million people.
But he's not advocating for censorship, guys. None of these people are advocating for censorship. It's not censorship that they're advocating for. That's what blows my mind. Like, at least be honest. Like, at least come out here and say, like, we don't want him on air. We want to silence this guy.
Yeah, and this especially concerns me as a leftist because look where the energy in the country, the electorate is clearly drifting right now towards the right. Everyone knows it. Joe Biden is an ineffective president. The current showing for the left in electoral politics has been absolutely pathetic to say the least. And the right wing is currently the prevalent ideology. For people to tune in to MSNBC, which is perceived as the left network, and hear these talking points now on a mainstream regular basis coming from the likes of Mr. Sam Seder, it gives the left a terrible look. It's a terrible look. It gives us a terrible name. And yes, slowly but surely, it is the Democratic Party and people like Sam Seder who sympathize with the Democratic Party that are becoming the cheerleaders of censorship. I think that's just undeniable at this point, which again is not a good thing. That's not something I'm happy about or proud of. I'm very uncomfortable with the left embracing censorship. I think the left should return to the former days of being against censorship at all costs. It should be one of the core tenets and values that we embrace as a left. But yeah, Miss Marion Williamson points out something that was very insightful, very true. She says, just to be clear, at least 15 years of U.S. military presence in Afghanistan was based on misinformation, quote unquote, coming from the highest levels of our government and media, I would add. Thousands of Americans, at least hundreds of thousands of Americans, at least hundreds of thousands of Afghans died because of it. No bigger misinformer than the Pentagon, nor the media, which printed their lies and sold us on this invasion. amping up tensions after 9/11. But yeah, let's go back to this Sam Seder clip real quick, because I just want to listen to it one more time and really think about the implications of what he's saying.
You're talking to 11 million people every time you do a podcast. You have a responsibility. And if you're the company that's paying for it, it's on you. And he gets a Spotify paycheck. And so it's on them. It's part of their brand now that they are the ones.
All right, so this is just so dumb for so many fucking reasons. First of all, obviously, he's on MSNBC saying this. Are they not responsible for all the disinformation that they've spread over the years, specifically in the last, 4 to 6 years about Russiagate, but obviously going back to the days of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, when they literally fired people like Jesse Ventura because they were anti-war and helped manufacture consent for those invasions. So, to say this on MSNBC is just ridiculously hypocritical, obviously, and to be on the payroll of MSNBC, let's be clear. But also, doesn't Sam Seder cast to YouTube? Doesn't Sam Seder cast to, other platforms too that also host right-wingers? Is his implication here just that every media platform has an obligation to purge anyone that's saying things that he disagrees with, at least when it comes to this subject matter? Where do you draw the line there exactly? Is it just Joe Rogan that should go, or is it literally every single person that's talking about this in a way that's not pre-approved by the media? And Rogan was correct in his video when he pointed out that, certain things about COVID and about masks, for example, or even the vaccine were once flagged as misinformation and now are accepted as truth. This is simply factual. So by Sam's logic, should Spotify, should YouTube have kicked off people that were talking about that stuff before it was proven as true? Do those people then get their accounts back? We're talking about people's livelihood here. People like Zach and I who do this for a living. And yeah, sometimes we're in the process of figuring things out. That's how things are figured out, through a robust debate, through an online, commentariat these days, which is discussing these issues. It has to get worked out somehow. And some things are proven to be false. Some things are proven to be true. But you can't just ban everyone in the process before things are ironclad or.
Oh, 100%. And if you want to play the game where you're talking about people are losing their lives because they're not taking the vaccine, how many people lost their lives because we got into Iraq, guys? How many fucking people lost their lives because you think you would have the principled stance to not go on that broadcast corporation? Because as you said, Sam, the media conglomerate that pushed all those narratives is responsible. Who signed their checks, Sam, while everybody was out here on MSNBC talking about how we had to defend freedom, fuck the Dixie Chicks? You remember? Come on. You're way older than me. You got to remember, because I fucking remember, right? I remember that time when even people who were supposedly Democrats, like John Kerry, wanted us to go in there and just fucking carpet bomb the Middle East because they have no conscience and they're savages. That was real, and that was getting fucking paraded and celebrated on MSNBC, and you were an anti-American and a radical and a lunatic. Okay? If you didn't want our president to protect our country, of course. Okay? Where are they paying the price for that? Okay, Joe Rogan said some shit that you disagree with about vaccine in a country where they have had the most clusterfuck vaccine rollout, public health involvement. It was never going to be solved by Joe Rogan. You know that. Shame on you for pretending it would have. It's the government's fucking fault. If we had a reasonable, responsible fucking government, we could have avoided this. We would have handled this like fucking reasonable, civilized fuckers. But instead, there was a golden opportunity to profit off of the backs of all these fucking poor people. Again, print trillions of dollars a day for Wall Street, inflate the fucking wealth of the already opulent. I mean, that's exactly what the fuck was happening, right? So let's just not pretend that something else is happening where it's like this evil, fucking toe-shaped podcaster is out here ruining the world because he has some questions about the vaccine. I'm sorry, but you're full of fucking shit, and it's so obvious that you're a liar. I don't even fucking like this guy, but I'm giving like a passionate defense of him because I'm like, I don't see where all this fucking hate is coming from.
Well, it's because you're principled, Zach, and you don't base your opinions on censorship on whether or not you like or agree with the person in question, which I thought was a self-evident thing that the left had come to agree on, that principle to defend the value of free speech and the First Amendment, even when it comes to arguments we disagree with. And And yeah, just as a personal consumer as well, I would hate the precedent that this would set. I have, long looked to the internet as the last vestige of real interesting dialogue going on. You can't turn on the goddamn, television or even the radio necessarily for the most part anymore and hear anything other than establishment talking points, regardless of what the subject matter is. The internet is absolutely the last bastion of true free speech, and less so it's being whittled away. But to do something like kick Joe Rogan off of Spotify would set this precedent in media environment, social media landscape, which is already crushing independent voices, which is already crushing non-mainstream, non-authoritative news source voices. Channels like ours, channels like so many of the people we have on our show, we know what we're talking about. This would only be one, more tile falling in the direction against independent media and for corporate media. And obviously, Joe Rogan's not an independent podcaster anymore. Don't get me wrong. I understand that he's working for a giant corporation now and got paid a hell of a lot of money to do that. So don't get me wrong. But the point is that you can still go there to hear conversations that aren't just, establishment talking points being regurgitated to you. Unfortunately, sometimes he does have on people like, CIA spooks to talk about why we still need to be in Afghanistan. And for those reasons, I don't actually love Joe Rogan. Again, like you said, Zach, neither of us are even particularly huge fans of Joe Rogan. We're still defending him based on our principled value of free speech and upholding it. So, that's what I think is so outrageous here. And again, just before we move on to our next topic, just listen to this opening line from Sam Seder one more time, keeping in mind the fact that he is on MSNBC as he says this. Just bathe in the shocking hypocrisy of this clip.
You're talking to 11 million people every time you do a podcast. You have a responsibility. And if you're the company that's paying for it, it's on you. And he gets a Spotify paycheck. And so it's on them. It's part of their brand now that they are the ones who are publishing this stuff. They are profiting off it. And it is hurting people. And it's their responsibility, and it's their
literally without irony, on MSNBC, which, as I said, manufactured consent for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and every military intervention since, obviously, as well as manufactured consent for this Russiagate conspiracy theory, which escalated tensions with a nuclear superpower, edging us closer to World War III. And also which let the Democrats basically just get off the hook entirely for their faults in the 2016 election, an election which should have triggered major introspection for the party.